Hey everybody, so there's a new version of Apigee that has been released. Actually, it has been released for a few months now, and you probably have looked at the documentation and it might be a little bit scary. Hey, I want to try this out, but looks like there's a lot of steps. I just don't know how to do it. So what we're going to be doing today is together, we're going to be going through the documentation and go from 0 to 100 and get the full installation of the Apigee X evaluation. I am Miguel Mendoza, and you're going to learn something today. Great, so let's get started. And this video is going to be as little scripted as possible. If I make any mistakes, you're going to see them happening live while I'm doing them, and we're going to figure them out together. So let's search for Apigee X, which is the name of the new Apigee version. So how to install Apigee X. Okay, there we go. So looks like we have a few results, and it's taking us to install Apigee Hybrid Runtime. We don't really want Apigee Hybrid, we want Apigee X, but let's just click there to see what's available. And we're at the Apigee Hybrid installation. Yeah, it was not the greatest result on Google search, so I know where I need to go, which is really Apigee X. And so let's just go back to the main page, which is really cloud.google.com apigee/docs. Great. So what are we having here? We have a quick start. So let's just do that. Quick start. Setup and configure. All right, great. So this is easy so far, except for the part that the Google search took me to somewhere else that I was not really what I wanted to do, but we're here now. All right, so what we're gonna be doing is we want to provision an evaluation org. If you're a paid customer, this is where you want to be, provision a paid organization. But I'm going to be pretending I'm a just person off the street, who wants to try out Apigee X. So let's do an evaluation org. Great. So here we see the steps, or let me see. Yeah, kind of the steps and the prerequisites to provision an evaluation org. And it's telling me the provisioning process will result in the following: creation of an eval org. Great. A runtime instance. This is important. We're going to take a look at the architecture for Apigee X, and I'll try to explain what a runtime instance is. Configuration of service networking for that instance. Perfect. We'll take a look at that as well. Creation of an environment group. Great. So this might be a little bit like if you're just coming in here for the first time and you're reading this, oh my God, what are all these things? Don't worry, I'm going to try to explain it all. Assignation of an environment group host name. Yeah, again, I'll try to explain it all as we go through. Deployment of an API proxy to the instance. Hey, if this is probably the main step you're familiar with. I know what deploying an API proxy is, but to an instance, what is an instance? Don't worry. Again, let's go through it. Prerequisites. So in addition to the previously described prerequisites, previously described? I don't know. Let's just click there. What are these previously described prerequisites? Google Cloud billing account. I don't know. I mean, I'm just want to try it out. All right, well, we'll have to create a billing account. Should we go and create a billing account? Maybe this is not for evaluation. I don't know. Let's see. Sign in to manage billing account, billing create. Yeah, I think this is really taking me to the paid customer thing. I'm just going to ignore it and go back. Google Cloud project. Okay, yeah, I can create that. And software, Google Cloud SDK. I'm going to need that as well. Okay. So let's do those things. So how do we create a Google Cloud project? Create a new Google Cloud project. When you do, be sure to know the project ID. Yes, I understand all that. What else? There's some limitations in the project name. Great. And for more information, create a project. So let me open this in a new tab. And yes, creating a project. Go to create a project. You must have a resource manager. Well, creating a new project. All you need to do is you go to console, cloud.google.com, and you create a project over there. So let's just take the easy route. Console, cloud.google.com. And I'm already signed in. This is a temporary account that I created just so that I can get the free trial 300 credits for this demo. I mean, I already have a official Google.com account, but I don't want to show you that experience. I want to show you the experience you would go through if you're doing this on your own. So United States, yes, perfect. And it says your free trial account is waiting. Activate now to get, yes, give me $300. Activate. All right, Miguel Mendoza, yes, I agree. Continue. All right, business name. I am not a business, so maybe I should change this to personal. Yes, I am an individual. And, oh, okay, that's convenient. I'll use PayPal. So this is going to ask me to put some billing information. Remember that step where it asked to create a billing account? Right now, because we have the $300 credit in here, we're not going to be really charged, at least not while during the duration of the Apigee X trial, because $300 is going to be more than enough to cover the trial. And it wants my information, so let's just put my information in here. Well, okay, well, it looks like it's not really liking my PayPal account. So let's just change course and put a credit card in here. I realize not everybody might have a credit card available. That's why I was trying to do the PayPal method. It's kind of a bummer, but hey, let's go through it. Like I said, you're not really going to be charged. You're going to be using the $300 credit, and even that $300 credit is not really for the Apigee trial. It's just to have a Google account with services or Google Cloud account with services. You have to put the billing information. Welcome, Miguel. All right, so we got through the first step. We have a Google account with billing information, obviously, but we don't really have a project. And one of the things in here, like the real thing we're trying to do is just create a project. So let's just go ahead and do that. My first project. Oh, I already have a project. It's called My First Project. How convenient. And it's got a weird ID there, United Firefly. So I think we have technically satisfied this project creation. So I'm just gonna close this page over here, come back to the prereq software, install Google Cloud SDK. I already have that, but for the sake of argument, or let's just do it. Install Google Cloud SDK. Now this really depends on what operating system you're using. So I am using Mac OS. So I think I want this one, Mac OS 64-bit, x86 64. If you're, I see what's going on. It actually detected that I'm in Mac OS, and it just took me to this tab. So if you're any other operating system, click your operating system and download and install. You know how that goes. So let's assume that I already have gcloud installed, Google Cloud SDK curl. Sometimes you have to make HTTP calls like to configure stuff, and the examples that the documentation use, they give you curl examples. But if you understand HTTP, you can basically take that curl example and use Postman or whatever HTTP client you like and use that instead. All right, so we're done with the prereqs. Let's go back to click here, evaluation org. All right, so we already looked at this prerequisite. Ensure that you can access these components by executing the command. All right, well, that looks simple, so let's do it. Okay, while that's happening, let's read a little bit ahead and see. Okay, so creating eval orgs with the eval wizard. This section describes how to use the Apigee provisioning wizard to create an org. Okay, yeah. Some of the steps in this process overlap with the installation process for paid orgs, which also use the provisioning wizard. However, they're different enough that the steps are described separately. So this is, I guess we're just gonna be using a wizard. I know how to install Apigee X just using gcloud, using command line, but we're following the doc, so this is what we're gonna be doing. Let's use the provisioning wizard. While we're using the provisioning wizard, I'm gonna be trying to explain what's actually happening behind the scenes and jump into the GCP console to tell you really what's happening. All right, so look like it is done updating. Great. So ensure that you have met all the prerequisites before continuing. Check, we have that. Create a Google Cloud project if you have not done already. Know the project ID. Yes, we have that. And here's our project ID. And I think we can get the specific project info somewhere in here. Project settings. There we go. So you click on the top right, then click on project settings, and there you go, project ID, project number. A lot of the time your project name and your project ID are the same. I guess this one was created automatically for me, so I didn't have a choice. And project number, I don't know if we're gonna need project number. All right, well, let's go back. We don't need this tab anymore. Here we go. So we note the project ID, not the same as the name. Yes, we check that. It's not the same as the name. Name different from project ID. Check. Enable all the required APIs for your Google Cloud project if you have not done already. For more information, see enable. Oh, great, more prerequisites. Why wasn't this listed? Okay, well, let's do it. All right, enable all these APIs: Apigee, Service Networking, Compute Engine, Cloud Key Management Services, also known as KMS. And okay, so look like it's giving me a gcloud command that I can run to enable this. So logging and initialize your gcloud project if I haven't done it already. Enable 4 required APIs. All right, this seems simple enough. But it's not really telling me how to logging and initialize. So maybe there should be a link here telling me how to do that. I kind of know how to do that. So gcloud auth login. All right, I am authenticated. That was easy enough. Let's go back. Enable the APIs. Yes, we were in here. Note that this section uses project ID variable that you created. What? I didn't create that. In step 1, I'm just going through. Okay, it's a little bit confusing. Hey folks, this is Miguel from the future here. I'm going to pause here for a second just to explain why this confusion happened. So here we are technically in the instructions for configuring a paid organization. So how did we end up in this page? Well, that happened earlier when I was in the other instructions for setting up an eval organization. It asked me to, hey, go and enable the APIs. and I click there. And when you do that, basically it takes you to the instructions for a paid organization. Where it got confusing was later when within these instructions, it asked me, hey, there's some things that you should have done earlier, which is define this set of environment variables. I was like, no, you didn't ask me to do it. This is a completely different set of instructions. Eventually, what I ended up doing, I just stayed on the instructions for a paid organization, and that's what you're going to see through the rest of the video. All right, let's keep going. Oh, there's another step and configure. This is different from this page that I'm going through. Okay, well, which one should I follow? I guess, yeah, this is what I did already. gcloud login, gcloud init. I think this, let's just do this one. gcloud init. Initialize the cloud SDK. I think I already did that, but let's do it again. It's just probably going to ask me to set up the project, a few things. So I already did components update. No, thank you. Configure project. Yes, that's probably next step I need to do. But let's just follow the instructions. gcloud init. Account. Yes. Project. I don't want this project. This is something else I'm doing for work. Reinitialize this configuration with new settings. Yeah, sure. Let's reinitialize the configuration. Great. So it's being initialized. Yes. Thank you. So I think if I run gcloud config list, yes, account and project all set up. Now it's so I'm done with step number 2. Next, define the following environment variable for the current project. Okay, that seems simple. And should I fill it up in here? Yeah, might as well. Project ID. Let's get that project ID. Project number. Oh, smart enough. It's got a gcloud command in here to get the project number, so I don't have to put it again. That's nice. Runtime location. Looks like there's descriptions on here. So runtime location is a physical location where your instance is located. Valid values are any compute engine region for paid orgs, or a compute engine zone for eval orgs. So notice the difference. For paid organizations, it's a region, and for evaluation organizations, which is what we're creating right now, it's a zone. Okay, fair enough. So runtime location, again, this is a zone here, US West 1A. If you're doing a paid, if you're deploying a paid organization, completely different. You need a region, which basically just remove the dash A from the end, and that's it. Now for analytics, we're gonna pick US West 1. So we have set this. Now I'm just actually going to create an environment file. So I'm just gonna call it Apigee env. Save this and let's source it. Apigee env. Clear. Great. So this is weird because here we were at enable APIs step already. Somehow in this page, we ended up in this enable APIs and define an environment. This is jumps me all over the place. Define environment variables. Yes, we did that. And now I have like a bunch of tabs open. So let me just close some of the stuff. I feel like I'm following this. I don't know if you played this game called Oregon Trail, where it's like choose your own adventure, and basically you say, hey, at each step of the road, you had to make a decision. It's kind of a little bit how it feels. I mean, we're getting there. But you know, in Oregon Trail, you can die at any time if you make the wrong decision. That's kind of the feeling here. But let's keep going through this. All right. So enable APIs. Yes, we want to enable APIs. Seems that's the general direction that it wants me to go, to enable APIs. So I'll go and enable the APIs. Okay, so yeah, we're on the same page, step 2. So somehow I ended up in step 2 here, but then I see what happened. So I was in here in enable APIs, and then I click here, so it took me back to step 1, which I missed. But how did I miss that? Shouldn't I have been at step 1 in the first place? Like, why? Oh, okay. Again, this is all my fault. Okay, and there's so many links. So to create an eval org, ensure you have met all the prerequisites. So if I had clicked on prerequisites here, it probably would have taken me to step 1, and eventually to step 2. I already did it. I didn't take the linear path. I just went ahead, then went back. So we're at step 2 now. So I'm just gonna close this, step 2. Great. So enable APIs. So I think we're finally ready. We got the environment set up, and we can just run this gcloud command. So the operation finished successfully. Woohoo! Yeah. All right. So next, gcloud services list to check my work. Should I check my work? Nah. It said I finished successfully, so I'm just gonna assume it did and move on. Create an organization. Oh, now we're getting to the interesting parts. So let's open the provisioning wizard in a new tab. Great. So project ID. I have the project ID. It's right here. Next. All right. So we're doing evaluation. So we'll do evaluation. Start evaluation. Enable APIs. Woo! It's checked. So the wizard detected that the APIs are already enabled, so it should be good. Which makes me think, if I had just gone directly to the wizard, would the wizard have enabled the APIs for me? Probably not, because in order for the wizard to work, it needs the APIs. So yeah, there goes that. Networking. We'll need to edit networking. Yes. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just go back to the doc. So the doc tells me enter the project ID. Yes. So obviously right away I can tell this steps this is describing here is not matching what I'm seeing in here. So yeah, maybe I'm in the wrong page, but I'm just following the instructions. So this is telling me, to click next, and then, it goes to the Apigee organization, which is obviously not where I am right now. I'm in the networking section. So is there a networking section in here? There's no networking section. Yeah, I think that's mainly because the documentation is describing the process that a paid customer will go through. So let's ignore that for a second. So authorized network. What are we choosing here? Default. Great. So I already chose default. Now, why am I choosing default? When you create a Google Cloud project, you automatically get a default VPC, virtual private cloud network, created for you. So this is the default network that's created. You could always create your own, but then you have to specifically set all these AP ranges and all that. Hey, if you know what you're doing, go ahead and do that. I'm just gonna choose default because that's the easiest path right now. Right, reserve a peering range. So this is an important step. We're going through the evaluation process, so the easiest path is to let it automatically pick a range. But if you were, let's say, I had picked a custom network that I created, you probably in that case you want to call this path, select a one or more existing AP ranges or create a new one, because when you have created your own VPC and then you have you're probably planning out the subnets that you're going to have and all that, and what this range is saying is that, hey, out of this VPC network that I created, I want to carve out a range of IP addresses just for Apigee to use. Again, we're doing evaluations, so we're automatically allocating an IP range. Okay, networking is going through. So while this is happening, I'm gonna try to explain what's happening, right? So first thing usually does, it will set up this range. So if we go click on default through my network, and okay, where is the VPC peering? Oh, it's not set. Oh, there we go. Private service connection here. It's just my window was not long enough. So at some point you're going to see a range that's being allocated in here. So what's happening? So it will go ahead and allocate this a range of IP addresses for Apigee to use, and it's going to peer with another Google Cloud project. Think of it like a sibling project to your project, right? So you have my project here, which is called my first project. Remember United Firefly? Funny name. That project is usually referred to as the customer project, right? So this is my project, I'm the customer, so this is the customer project. There's another sibling project to that where Apigee brings up the infrastructure needed for the organization, and that's usually referred to as the tenant project, right? That tenant project that's managed by Google, you don't have to worry about it. At least for the most part, you don't have to worry about that. But you do have to make sure that there's connectivity between your project and that tenant project. And the way that is done is through peering. So the two projects are, the VPCs are peered, and connection is made, and a set of IP addresses are reserved for that. So I think it's already created. Yeah, this is the connection already in here. Yep, it's already been created. Let me refresh this. Okay, and you can see the IP address. So that, I think that's the range of IP addresses that Apigee is going to be using. And yeah, I think we're good. So if we go back to the wizard, hey, networking, check mark, done, next step. Yeah, at this point I'm way off the the bounds of the documentation, because we went on our old adventure in here setting up networking, which was not in the documentation, or maybe it is, it's just not in the order that I went through. So let's go ahead and click edit on the next step, which is Apigee evaluation. Great. So choose an analytics region. So analytics region, we want to be in the West. This is a much smaller subset than all the regions that you could possibly deploy in Google Cloud. And I think that's just a point in time thing. Probably this is only the regions that are supported for Apigee at the moment. Over time, this set is probably going to grow larger. So we're going to choose US West 1, and we're going to choose a zone here. I guess look, the wizard is already telling me to choose a zone. It doesn't let me choose a region because it knows we're provisioning an evaluation org, which is nice. I don't even have to know that there's a rule for that. So I just click and select the zone. So US West 1A, US West 1, and we're going to hit provision. Now this command, this is going to take a while. This provisioning of the organization behind the scenes is really multiple steps. One step is actually just telling Apigee, hey Apigee, go ahead and create an org with this name, right? And the name is going to match the name of my, I haven't activated my $300. Please, let's do it now. Yes. Oh, there we go. Activated successfully. So what was I saying? Yeah, project settings. So the Apigee organization name is going to match your project ID name. And that's it. So that first thing that this does, it's provision that organization. Then in addition to having the organization provision, that's just kind of like metadata, right? It needs to actually have what's called a runtime instance. A runtime instance is the actual devices or the actual virtual machines that receive the API traffic, right? And that runtime instance is going to be created in US West 1A, but it's not going to be in this project, right? If I go to Compute Engine, I'm not going to see any of that in here. It's going to be empty. So all those VMs and whatever internal runtime VMs that Apigee creates, those are created in the tenant project. This would probably be easier if I just bring up a diagram. Let's see. Let's Google Apigee X architecture. Oh, there we go. This is the diagram. Okay, so customer VPC network, Google network. You can see here the name's tenant project, the thing I was talking about. And here you can see customer project. So on one side, you have your customer project, right, which is my United Firefly, and then you have the tenant project, which is created automatically behind the scenes, and Google manages that for you. And in here, you have like Kubernetes cluster in the zone that you chose, and in that cluster you have the actual pods that take the Apigee traffic and all that, automatically scales. It's great, it's beautiful. And that Kubernetes cluster uses IP addresses from that range that was specified. So if we come back in here, network, go to the default network, VPC network, peering. Yeah, you can see the network peering is there, and you have this range. So those pods in that Kubernetes cluster, those will have IP addresses from that range. And Apigee will create some subnets and all that, and will make use of those IP addresses as it needs. If more pods are created, more IP addresses will be used, and so on, depending on the amount of traffic that you're sending, really. Now you can see there's other stuff in here being shown, like VMs and stuff. We're gonna go through that later. For now, we just have to wait till this step completes. Now this step can take between 20 to 30 minutes. Depends on the weather that day. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, it does take around 20 to 30 minutes to complete. So I'm just gonna pause here, and I'm gonna speed up the video. Once that's complete, we're gonna come back and finish the setup. All right, so it's been around 25 minutes since we ran the last step, which was to finally provision the organization and create the instance. So the wizard is now complete, and it's telling us, hey, go to the Apigee console. So let's just go ahead and do that. Now you can either click here or go to apigee.google.com. That's the Apigee console, apigee.google.com. And you can see here now you're greeted to what it's, if you worked before with Apigee, this kind of looks like the Apigee HUI, but it's really Apigee X. This is, the instance and the organization that were created by the wizard. So you have here United Firefly, which is that organization, and we can go ahead and click around to see what was created. So out of the box, you can see there is a hello world proxy. We didn't create that. That was created by the wizard. And if we go into admin, there's some new stuff here. So if I click in here, you'll see that, hey, there's an instance called eval instance. The location is in US West 1, and here's the IP address of that instance. This is an internal IP address. This is not an IP address that is routable from the internet. So if we want to make a call to Apigee, the call needs to originate from within the same network where the instance is created. And there's a way that we can make this available externally, and we'll take a look at that in a second. So an instance in Apigee, it's really the runtime, right? And so right now we have a runtime that's available in US West 1A. Now, typically in Apigee, the way you organize proxies is when you deploy them, you publish them to or deploy them to environments. And what's new in Apigee X that these environments get grouped in what are called environment groups. And the environment groups are what control how do you invoke those proxies and what is the ingress to call those proxies. And you should be able to take a look over here. So if we go to environments and click on overview, you should see now that, hey, there's an environment called eval, right? And this is the typical environment you're used to seeing in Apigee X. It's no different. You can deploy share flows, you can deploy proxies to that environment, typical stuff. The new thing is environment groups. You can have one or more environments attached to an environment group. In this case, the group that was created for us by the wizards called eval group, and there's only one environment attached. You can see here environments eval. So you can have, eval 1, eval 2, eval 3, eval 4, and so on. All right, so hopefully that clears up what is an environment and what is an environment group. And if I go ahead and click here in the eval group, you can see that this is the host name. This was put in here by the wizard. And even though you can see a domain name here, it doesn't mean it's actually reachable or that there's a DNS entry somewhere. There actually isn't. There's no DNS entry created anywhere. This is just made up. The wizard puts it in there just so that there's something, because it's required. But it could say something else like Miguel that example.com, something like that. Doesn't really matter right now because it's not a real DNS entry that's created somewhere. I'm gonna leave it as is for now, and later we're going to go and actually provision or make all of this accessible externally, and we're going to use a different domain name and everything. Now, if we go back to the instructions, okay, was this the page? Provision and eval org. Oh yeah. So this is the last stage we were in. We clicked, and the organization and the environment group got created, the environment got created, the instance itself got spun up. So we now have an org. Everything is ready, or almost everything is ready. So what is next? We went to the console. I already showed you, clicked around so you can see, the stuff that got created. Great. So next steps. The next step is to get a proxy up and running and send a request to it. Great. Let's go ahead and do that. So after everything was created, we had the runtime. We can prepare to send the call privately to the deployed API proxy. Remember, privately, because we don't have an external ingress just yet. This is all within the VPC of the project that I created. All right, so how do we do that? Before we can do that, we have to gather some information. All right, yeah, so we know the proxy hello world that was created. We saw that in the console. We also have the environment group and the environment. Great. And we also saw the on our environment group, what was the host name. That's all good. One thing we're going to need is to get the internal IP address of the load balancer. Now these instructions are telling me to use curl to get this information. We don't really need to. We already saw that this is something new in the console, right? So if we go back over here in instances, this IP address, that is the internal IP address of the load balancer for the instance that I have running in the US West one. So I'm not going to go ahead and run this step to run a curl command. I already have that IP address. So we should be able to move forward with the next set of instructions. After you got these details, you can begin the process of accessing the API proxy. All right, so to access an internal proxy not exposed externally, yes. This what is this doing? Oh, okay. So if we need to make a call internally, we have to make a call from somewhere. So what this is telling you is that, hey, why don't you go ahead and create a VM in that project, and that VM will be in the same network, so you can make calls from that VM into Apigee. And that kind of makes sense, right? I cannot just make the calls from my laptop because that's in a completely separate network. So I need to be in a virtual machine that's in the same network. I could go and use the CLI, to do this. Not gonna do that. I'm just going to use the UI. So console.cloud.google.com. We go in there. Now we still have those 300 credits, $300 in credits. So the VM I'm gonna create is gonna come from those $300 in credits. So this will take I don't know, around a minute for the VM to be created and spun up. While that's doing, let's go back to the instructions to see what's after this. So after you have the VM spun up, open a secure connection. Yes, that just means SSH into the VM. We're also going to do that from the UI. From the VM, send the request payload. Yes, so this is what actually going to show that we're calling a proxy in Apigee. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at that VM. And this is what where we're gonna make the call from. And let me just gather all those details that we needed earlier. So the instance IP address. Let's copy that first. Where are the instructions? Right here. So this is a call we're going to be doing. Make it a little bit bigger. Right. All right. Environment group hostname. That is, and also the internal load balancer IP address. That's the address of the instance. So we're gonna copy this address. Great. And also put this host name. So that's in the group. This host name right here. All right, so what this is saying, this is telling curl, hey curl, connect to this IP address and access this API proxy, which is already deployed. And here's the host name. Normally the call wouldn't, you wouldn't normally make a call that way. You would just say something like curl-i k. I'll go in a second why we're using k. HTTPS, and it would look something like this. right? That's how it would normally look, right? So why are we doing it this way? Well, one thing is that we don't have a DNS entry created for this, so we cannot. If I try this is not gonna work. DNS resolution is just gonna break, right? So that's one thing. That's why we have to pass a host header directly. And because we don't have DNS resolution, which means that we have to do the DNS resolution ourselves, so we have to tell curl what is the actual IP address. And again, this is all temporary. Once we have a DNS entry and load balancer, we can make calls from outside without any of this. And the other thing, why do we need -k? Well, -k is necessary in this case because again, this is set up automatically by Apigee. Notice Apigee did not ask us what certificates do you want to use, to set up your organization. No, it just used internally. Apigee has a self-signed certificate, which is not necessarily trusted by my browser or by my client. So that's why we need -k. When you set up external access, then you can have whatever certificate you want in there, and we're also going to take a look at that. All right, enough of that. Let's just actually try it. So we'll go back to the terminal. It's just a little bit small, the text. We should be able to just make a call, and let's try it. Great, you can see it actually worked. It says hello guest. That's a response coming from the proxy. To prove that, let's just actually do a trace. API proxies, hello world, and let's select the environment, start trace. Now I'm gonna send a few calls from over here. Let's try that again. There you go, one call. Let's send a couple more. And you can see already one of the, or three of them are showing now. Those are the 3 calls I made. All right, so you can see the call over here. Hey, get hello world, because that's what we called, and the information, and should be able to see the client. It came from curl, and there's some extra headers added here. I didn't pass these headers. These are added, as a call passes through the internal Apigee ingress, and some of these are useful for other stuff. I'm not gonna go into that. And you can see finally the response that was sent to the client, which is hello guest. Great, so it is working. Woohoo! We have a working API in an instance after about an hour or so of starting this process. Next, we're going to go and set up external access to this. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. Where do we start? All right, so let's go back and take a look at that architecture diagram I was showing you earlier. And right here. So remember how I mentioned that there's some stuff here that you didn't have to create? Well, now this is the time to create those things. So in order to get external access into your Apigee instance, you have to basically create a load balancer on the customer project. That's what you're seeing here, cloud load balancer. And that load balancer will go and forward traffic to a group of virtual machines which are responsible for forwarding the traffic from the customer project to the tenant project. Now, the reason why we need these virtual machines is that at the moment the L7 load balancers are not able to forward traffic directly to a peered network. That's probably going to change in the future, and it might get better, and you will not need these VMs, but for now this is the way we're going to do it. Now, one of the things that also you're going to need when you're doing this is that you need a proper domain name, right? So that's one thing. And the other thing is a certificate. Now, you could always go ahead and get a self-signed certificate, but that's not ideal because then the browser will go and give you errors and maybe not even let you access the website, or the APIs. So as part of this process, I'm gonna go and take you through the creation of the domain, which includes the DNS entry and the certificates. For certificates, we're going to be using Google Managed Certificates, and domains, we're gonna be using the basically cloud domains from Google Cloud. Now, all this stuff that I'm gonna be setting up in here, this is not really part of the Apigee X evaluation experience per se, right? So whatever you create, extra stuff that you're creating here, those are gonna go toward those $300 credits that you have in your account when you first sign up for a Google Cloud account. All right, so let's jump into the documentation and find the instructions for how to do all of this. So last time we were where were we? Oh yeah, we were here. So last time we were in this page, we were able to essentially make this curl call, no problems, and from within an internal virtual machine in the same project, successful. If I were to try doing that same curl call from external, we know it wouldn't work. So this is how we're gonna fix it. Now, I need to find the instructions. I know this for paid organizations, there's instructions that teach you how to create the load balancer and all those things. So let's go ahead and look for those. This is the configure routing step. And you can see here that, hey, these are the individual steps to configure external routing for a paid organization. This should also work for your evaluation organization. So first step is enable private access for the subnet. All right, so to enable private Google access for the subnet, follow the steps listed in enable Google private access. It says, click on the name of the subnet. So let's go ahead and, select this subnet. And let's use maybe, the US West 1 subnet. And you can see right now it's got, private Google access off. So we're going to edit that and turn it on. And let's go ahead and save. Great. So private access now is enabled. Let's go back to the steps. Next, set up environment variables. So I'm just going to copy this and create an environment file with the information from here. And you can see, there's some stuff predefined in here for you. The name of the MIG, you can leave this as is. You don't have to give it a new name. And we know the VPC name is default, and the VPC subnet is also default. So we don't have to touch those. And we're also in the US West 1 region. So that's all good. The only thing that's missing here is the Apigee instance IP, but we know where we can get that from, which is from the UI. So let's go back into the Apigee console, click on the instance, copy the instance IP address. Now let's fill this in. Yes. Now copy this and let's create a environment file. All right, so we're done with step 7B. All right, so next you use the variables several times during the process. Yes, and it's telling me here that to get the IP address, I can use the instances API. I already got it from the UI, so we'll skip that. Next, we're going to create a managed instance group. We are doing this in a single region, so we don't really have to worry about multi-region or anything like that. So it should be a simple managed instance group. And this is basically the command that we're going to be run, and everything is already using those environment variables. So we got the MIC name, the region, VPC name, VPC subnet, the Apigee endpoint. Let's go ahead and run the command. Nothing else needs to be changed. Copy, go back in here. Now paste this and we let it run. And that was quick. You know, the MIG has been created. Yeah, we were actually creating the template, not the actual managed instance group. That was my fault. I should have looked closer. So this is just creating a template. A template is kind of like just the instructions that say, hey, when you do create VMs for this group, this is what they should look like. And you can see here that, you know, these are, you know, the specific information that is going to be used to bootstrap each of the virtual machines. Now let's go ahead and actually create the managed instance group. All right, great. So the managed instance group has been created. Let's go and jump over to the console and refresh to see the new VMs. And there you go. We have 2 new virtual machines. Now these virtual machines are not that special if you compare them with the test VM. They just happen to be part of a managed instance group, which can scale up and scale down automatically based on some predefined rule. Now let's go back into the instructions. So we have the managed instance group created, and let's now set the auto-scaling rules. These are some sensible auto-scaling rules in here based on CPU utilization. So let's run this. Good. So the auto-scaling settings have now been applied. Next, let's define a named port. Now this is again the command line options for the creation of the entire load balancer plus managed instance group. So as part of this process, one of the things we're doing is that we're defining a port on those VMs and saying, hey, port 443 is going to be called HTTPS. That's just what this is doing. So let's go ahead and run this. Great. So that is complete. Now, next, let's run to the next step. Step 70, get IP address and create firewall rules. So for the load balancer that we're going to be creating, we can ahead of time determine an IP address that we want it to be using. So that's what this step is doing. So we're going to say, hey, let's reserve an IP address, and this is the IP address that's going to be used for the load balancer. So let's run the command. All right, so the IP address has been reserved. Now let's get the actual value of that IP address that we just reserved. And here's the IP address of the load balancer itself. So far so good. The load balancer does not exist yet. This is just setting up the base to create the load balancer. Next, what we have to do is we have to allow the Google Cloud Global Load Balancer to reach into our network when it receives a call. This is what this next command is for. We're setting up a firewall rule that says, hey, any call that comes in from any of these ranges, which happen to be the ranges for Google Cloud Load Balancer, they're allowed, let them through. All right, the firewall rule has been created. Great. Credentials. Now, this is a part that I was saying earlier. You may not necessarily want to have a self-signed certificate, so I'm going to deviate a little bit from the instructions, and instead of creating a self-signed certificate, I'm going to create a Google Managed Certificate. All right, so how do we create a Google Managed Certificate? The command should be very similar to this, and we can go ahead and look up the documentation. Let's look at the gcloud. Oh, look like there's a UI already now for that. In the past, I have used the gcloud approach, but since there's a UI, let's just go ahead and use that. So open link in a new tab. All right, so let's create an SSL certificate. What should we name this? Now this is important. So that this step fits into the instructions, we need to use the same name that the instructions are using. So if we go back to the instructions use this name, Apigee SSL Cert. So I'm going to be using the same name. And I'm not going to be uploading a certificate. I'm going to create a Google Managed Certificate. Now, domains. What domain should we use? There's a few ways we can do this. If you have a DNS zone that you manage, you can go ahead and register an entry in that DNS zone and point it to the load balancer IP address. We don't have one here, so I'm going to make up a domain name, and then we're going to go ahead and register it. You know what? Let's do it the other way around. Let's register a domain. So let's stop here and go back to the console. I mean, we have $300 in credit. We can use $12 of those to register a domain, I hope. So, and in Google Cloud, you have domains. So let's go ahead and enable this. So let's enable the domains API. All right, so let's go ahead and register a domain. The domain name I'm going to pick, let's say it's going to be Miguel Apigee Testing Dev. Let's see if that's available. Yes, it's available. So $1 a month, that fits into our $300 credits. So let's add it and continue. Acknowledge. So when you register a domain, you're really, with Google Cloud, you're really just paying Google to put the domain in a register. But you still need to manage the domain or manage the DNS zones for that domain. What this is saying here is use Google Cloud DNS, which is another product in Google Cloud, to manage the DNS zones. So we're going to tell it, yes, I want to do that. Privacy protection on, yes. Now I need to fill up some information which is required for registering a domain. So let me do that. All right, so domain is being registered. This is we're doing this for good. I mean, we're going to have Miguel Apigee testing that dep. All right, so the domain is being registered and looks like there's a warning. It's telling me that for the domain to work properly, you have to verify the email address. So they probably sent me an email and I just need to click on it to verify my email address. So I'm gonna go and do that. Let me open a new tab for that. All right, so the email address has been verified. So hopefully this warning should go away in a little bit. Now let's keep on going. So we have the domain registered and we have using Cloud DNS to manage this. So if we go to Cloud DNS, let's see if it created a zone, and it did create a zone for me. So in this zone, I'm going to add a record, a DNS A record that's going to point to the IP address of the load balancer, which we haven't created yet, but we will create later. So let's go into the zone. All right, so let's go ahead and create a record. And I'm going to leave this as is. I'm not going to add a subdomain. I want to use the top level domain. You can see this is a record type, and we're going to be using the IP address of the load balancer. We haven't created yet the load balancer, but we reserved an IP address for it. So let's go ahead and grab the IP address that we reserved earlier. And it's right here. Now let's come back over here and create the record. Great, so we have the record now created. So theoretically, now we can go back to the page where we were creating the certificate and just tell it, hey, here's the domain name that we're going to be using for this certificate. So let's go ahead and do that. Let me copy the domain. Now back in here, yes, we're going to be creating a Google Managed Certificate, and this is going to be the domain. And I think that should be all, so let's go ahead and create. All right, perfect. So we have a Google Managed Certificate created for this domain that we just registered. And we also, within this domain, we went to the DNS zone and added an A record that points to the load balancer. Again, the load balancer does not exist yet. We're going to be creating it next. Let's go back to the instructions. So we're technically done with this step 7. Finally, let's go ahead and create the load balancer. Now, for load balancer to work properly, one of the things you have to do is create a health check. So let's go ahead and create the health check. All right, the health check is complete, or the creation of the health check is complete. So load balancers have a front side and a back side. In our case, the back side is going to be the managed instance group, which is going to serve as a service for the load balancer. So we're going to define a backend service first. All right, so now that we have the backend service defined, let's go ahead and link this backend service to the managed instance group. So that's what this command is going to do. All right, looks like it worked. Let's move on to the next step. Next, we're going to be defining the front side of the load balancer. All right, so now that we have the load balancer front side and back side created, the last thing we have to do is to set a rule to tell Google Cloud so that when a request comes to the load balancer IP address, to forward that to the load balancer front side. And this should complete the creation of the load balancer. Great, so it looked like it was successful. I think we're technically done creating the load balancer. We have the managed instance group created. We created a domain name. We added a record and a record for that domain name and pointed it to the IP address of the load balancer. Finally, we finished configuring the load balancer. So let's go ahead and check in the console to make sure that everything looks correct. So I'm gonna go ahead and open a new tab. Go to the console. And here in the console, let's go ahead and take a look at load balancers. All right, so the load balancer has been created and we're able to see it here in the UI. Now let's go ahead and click on it so we can inspect and see the state of the load balancer. So right away you can see it's got two parts. It's got the front end and the back end. And the front end, as expected, it has the IP address that we reserved and the certificate that we created earlier. And on the backend side, it's pointing to the managed instance group, and it says it's healthy, 2 out of 2. We know there's 2 VMs in that managed instance group, so the backend looks good. The certificate, it still shows a warning here. That means it's not ready yet. It usually takes around probably 5 to 10 minutes for the certificate to fully provision. One of the things you have to verify to make sure that the certificate provisioning will succeed is you have to make sure that the domain name that you register points to the IP address of the load balancer. Let's go ahead and click on the certificate to see the domain. So here's the domain name. And we can verify that it points to the IP address of the load balancer by running the command ns lookup. So let's go ahead and do that from the command line. And indeed it does. You can see here it's telling me that here's the IP address associated with this domain name. And if we come back in here, we can double check, and this is it. Oh, and there we go. Now it's in a green state. So technically now both the front end and the back end of my load balancer are in a good state. So I think this is it. We should be ready to make calls into the Apigee instance through this external method. Let's go ahead and give that a try. All right, so to do that, I guess all we have to do is just run a crawl command from my terminal, or we can go in a new browser tab and make a call to the same proxy we called earlier. So let's go back and find that curl command. Here's the curl command. Now this was the curl from earlier. We don't have this domain name anymore. Now we have a proper domain name. Let's copy that. It's this. Oh, one more step I almost forgot. So we've basically set up everything on the GCP side. We set up the load balancer, we set up the certificate, we set up the domain, but we didn't tell Apigee that we're using this domain. So we do have to go to the Apigee console and update the environment group to tell it that this is the domain name that we're using. So let's go back into Apigee, go to the environment group, and we will update the United Firefly domain name to the new domain that we just created. And that is it. It has been saved. So let's go and now actually try this out. So let's run this. And you know what? We don't actually need -k anymore because we have a proper certificate. So theoretically, it should just work. So I'm going to cancel this and remove -k and cross my fingers and run the command. And it worked. We have a response from the proxy. We can see right here it says, hello guest. This is the actual API proxy that responded with this. Let me go ahead and do another trace so you can actually see this. So we go to API proxies, hello world, click on trace. Now we're going to start a trace session. And let's repeat the same call. We can send it a couple more times. Oh, no need. There it is. Here's a call that came from my laptop over the internet into the load balancer, which then got forwarded into the managed instance group and then got forwarded to the Apigee instance running in the tenant project. This is really cool, and you can actually confirm this. If you look at the X forwarded for header, it will have your IP address in here. Now in my case, I'm hiding the IP address because I don't want to show this to the world, but when you run it, you'll be able to see your IP address from your machine. And we can also see the agent. The user agent was curl, which was from the command line where we ran it. Let's do one more test. Let's go and open a new tab and call the API. So new tab, paste this, and there we go. Hello guest right here, and we can see it's a secure connection with a certificate that's issued by Google Trust Services. This is perfect. It's all working. If you've been following along and you got this to work as well, I hope you're as excited as I am, because this was truly a feat. We started from scratch with a empty Google Cloud project. We then followed the Apigee instructions to provision an Apigee organization and provision an instance within that Apigee organization in US West 1. Then we tested the connectivity from our project, which is the customer project, into that new instance. And that worked fine. To do that test, we used a virtual machine and that we just spun up temporarily. It was basically a test virtual machine, and that was perfect. We could make a call, but there were some issues with it. We couldn't use proper domain name, and also there were no trusted certificates. So we had to fix that. To fix those things, we then registered a domain name and also created a Google Managed Certificate. We then followed the Apigee instructions to stand up a load balancer as well as a managed instance group that was used to forward traffic from the internet into the Apigee instance. And that's what we just tested. We were able to make a call from the internet, and that call came in through the load balancer, then went to the managed instance group, then went to the Apigee instance. Well, folks, this is it for the video. It's been a long one, but a very exciting and productive one. If you found the video useful, leave a like and subscribe. My name is Miguel Mendoza, and I hope you learned something today. You're still here? The video is over. It's been an hour and 20 minutes. There's no more content. Alright, well, at least like and subscribe. Alright? Bye.